Groke 4.5 finishes the same coding task for about 17 times less money than Claude Opus 4.8. That's a real number, not a marketing exaggeration. But price won't tell you which one actually gets your work done right. Claude still beats Groke at specific things, and none of them are minor. Here's the plan: what Claude still wins at, whether that's worth 17 times the cost, and which one actually fits you. Start with the number itself. Since a claim this big deserves a quick check, it comes from two smaller numbers stacked together. Grok uses roughly 4 times fewer tokens to finish a coding task. Each of those tokens also costs about 4 times less. Multiply the two and you land near 17 times cheaper for the same finished work. Nobody announced that figure directly. It just holds up once you run the math on their published prices. Grok has genuinely caught up to Claude on raw coding work, especially anything inside a terminal or fully automated end-to-end. But Claude wins clearly in a few places. It follows instructions without drifting. It writes like a skilled human, and it can hold enormous projects in memory at once. Neither model is flat-out better. They're built for different jobs, and the price gap reflects that more than it reflects intelligence. Let's track this like a scoreboard, since the split gets clearer that way. Point 1 to Grok, for closing the automation gap. Give an AI 5 specific steps in order. Rename this, update those files, run the tests, fix what breaks, summarize the changes. Claude follows that exact sequence. Grok often finds a different route to the same result, which works, but isn't always the route you asked for. If you're the type who wants to check exactly what happened at each step, that gap matters more than it sounds. Point to Claude. Ask either model to rate technical documentation, and Claude's draft usually needs just a read-through before it ships. Grok's draft usually needs an actual editing pass first. The facts are right, but the polish isn't quite there. Picture a manager handing both drafts to a client. Claude's goes out with minor tweaks, Grok's comes back with comments and another round. Over dozens of documents a month, that gap adds up. Another point to Claude. Claude can also hold up to 1 million tokens at once, double what Grok currently handles. That means Claude can keep an entire large code base in its head and reason about how every piece connects. Grok starts losing track sooner on the same job. Say, missing how a change in one file quietly breaks something 3 files away. Groke's cursor training clearly helped its coding speed, but it can't train its way around a smaller memory ceiling. That's a structural gap, not a knowledge gap. Point to Claude again. Claude also leads by a wide margin on one specific skill: operating a computer the way a person would, clicking through a screen instead of just writing code. It's also the first model to pass a notably strict legal reasoning benchmark. Groke hasn't published comparable results in either category. Point 4 to Claude. One more honest note here. Groke's benchmark numbers come from XAI itself. Claude's have been checked by outside researchers, not just reported by Anthropic Verge. That doesn't make Grok's numbers false, but only one side of this comparison has been double-checked by someone with nothing to gain. There's one exception worth flagging. A separate research group ran its own independent test recently using close to 2,000 real professional tasks that had nothing to do with coding. And Grok actually scored higher than Claude on that one. So the gap isn't universal, it's concentrated specifically in the categories above. Independent developers have started running their own head-to-head trials too, on messy, real production code rather than clean benchmark tasks. And the early pattern roughly matches what we've covered here. Grok handles routine, well-defined fixes impressively well for the price. On trickier bugs buried deep in a large, unfamiliar codebase, testers report reaching for Claude more often, even knowing it costs more. That kind of organic testing tends to be a more honest signal than any official benchmark, since it comes from people spending their own money and trusting the result with their own deadlines. So the score sits at Grok 1, Claude 4. Don't count Grok out. The next few points swing hard the other way. Grok isn't just writing on price. Running a coding agent through a terminal all day, fixing errors and moving on without a human checking in is exactly where Grok now outperforms Claude. One reviewer described it as having a natural sense of pacing, knowing when to act and when to pause, which matters enormously over a long unsupervised task. Think of the alternative: an assistant who either rushes every decision without checking their work, or stops to double-check so often that nothing actually gets done. Neither extreme holds up over hours of unattended work. Knowing which moments genuinely need a pause is the specific skill reviewers are pointing to. Second point to Grok. Speed adds to that. Groke starts responding in under a second, Claude takes close to 2. Small on one question but noticeable across hundreds of requests a day. Third point, to Grok. Now the cost, made concrete. A small team running 100 coding tasks a day spends roughly $170 daily on Claude, versus about $10 on Grok. Over a month, that's $5,100 against $300 for genuinely comparable finished work. Fourth point, to Grok. And it's a heavy one. Cost isn't a tiebreaker here, it's its own category. Scale that down to a solo freelancer instead, running maybe 10 tasks a day rather than 100. That's still roughly $17 a day on Claude against $1 on Grok. Over a month, the gap runs about $500 versus $30. For someone paying that out of their own income rather than a company budget, that difference alone can be the deciding factor before any capability comparison even enters the conversation. That puts the score at 4 and 4. Dead even, which means the real answer depends on which category matters most for your specific work. A solo developer running an agent overnight to fix small bugs wants fast, cheap, and reliable enough to trust while asleep. That's Grok's lane, and the price difference alone could mean running the agent constantly instead of rationing it. Someone drafting a legal summary or asking an AI to click through a multi-step form wants Claude's reliability instead. And a company managing dozens of contracts a month where one misread clause costs real money will happily pay several times more per task for Claude's precision. The cost of one mistake there dwarfs any savings from going cheaper. So is what Claude does better worth paying up to 17 times more for? It depends entirely on the work. High volume, repetitive, comfortable, running with less supervision, that price gap is hard to justify ignoring. And Grok gets you most of the way there for a fraction of the cost. But if one mistake is genuinely expensive, a legal document, a code base where every piece connects to every other piece, instructions that can't drift, Claude's reliability earns its premium. Somewhere in between sits most day-to-day work, and that's exactly where the which one question stops being obvious and starts depending on how much risk you're actually comfortable carrying. Plenty of teams aren't choosing just one. They send the bulk of repetitive work to Grok and save Claude for the handful of tasks each week where precision actually matters more than cost. Think of it as a fast, affordable assistant handling the routine work, with a specialist called in only when the job actually needs one. That routing decision alone can cut a team's AI bill dramatically without giving up quality on the tasks that genuinely need it. It's also worth remembering how fast this specific gap could shift. Grok is the newer model here, and it closed a real gap with Claude in just a few months. If that pace holds, some of what Claude wins today could narrow again within an update or two. Anthropic isn't sitting still either. Opus 4.8 still holds a clear lead in the categories that matter most for high-stakes work. Whatever's true right now is a snapshot, not a permanent ranking. A few signs would tell you if that shift is actually happening. Watch whether Grok keeps closing the gap on the harder, longer coding tasks over its next couple of updates, not just the easier ones. Watch whether more independent researchers, not just XAI, start confirming similar numbers. And watch whether Anthropic responds to the price pressure directly, rather than just pushing out a higher benchmark score next time around. Any one of those would tell you more about where this is heading than today's numbers alone. Final score, 4 points each, plus a cost category large enough to arguably decide the tie on its own. Want the cheapest way to get real coding done and you're fine with slightly less polish? Grok is the clear pick. Need writing you can hand off without editing, or work that touches something high stakes? Claude still earns its price. Choosing one doesn't rule out the other. They answer two different questions. The real shift isn't that a cheaper model showed up. It's that price and quality have started pulling apart in a way they didn't before. You used to get roughly what you paid for. And picking the best model was mostly a matter of finding whichever one you could afford at the top of the leaderboard. That's no longer automatically true. The smarter move now is knowing which model earns its cost for which job and being honest with yourself about which one you're actually running, rather than defaulting to whichever name sounds most impressive. Zoom out, and this fits a bigger pattern across AI right now. A model doesn't need to top every leaderboard to be genuinely useful anymore. It just needs to be good enough at the specific job you need, priced low enough that the math makes sense. Groke's whole approach here actually resembles what several Chinese AI labs have been running for the past year. Get close enough on raw capability, then win the argument on price. If that keeps working for Grok the way it's worked for those challengers, expect the bigger labs to feel real pressure to cut prices, not just chase higher scores next time around. Keep that in mind for every future model release you hear about, not just these two. The headline number, whether it's a price tag or a benchmark score, rarely tells the whole story on its own. If you want an answer more personal than any video can give, there's a simple way to get one. Take a real task you already do every week, run it through both models with the exact same prompt, and time how long each takes. Note how much editing the output actually needs, and check what it costs using the pricing above. Do that with 3 or 4 real tasks and you'll know more than any comparison video, including this one, can tell you. If this helped you figure out which one fits your work, subscribe for more breakdowns like this. And tell me in the comments, would you trust the cheaper model with your daily work, or is Claude's reliability worth paying more for? Either answer is reasonable. This video's job was to help you choose on purpose instead of by default.